Hello and welcome to After Scientology, straight up and vertical. This is the show every week where Tony Ortega and I get to break down stories Tony has been talking about all week about Scientology. And this week, we're diving right in on the Masterson case. That was the bulk of the stories this week because sort of the pre-trial, there was a mistrial. Now we've got a pre-trial motions and this and that and other things happening. So, Tony, do you want to kind of break down what's the skinny for this week in what happened?
Right. So both sides are jockeying for position. They want to be able to get some rulings from the judge about which witnesses are going to be allowed in and that kind of thing. The defense's biggest complaint was that the prosecution wants some additional witnesses in, and the defense says we need more time for that, and they wanted a lot more time. But Judge Olmedo only gave him 6 more days. I mean, she wants this thing done.
Yeah.
And they really are only adding a couple of people, but it's very important, it seems to me, who they're adding.
Yeah. And can you break that down? Who are these new people?
Right. So Judge Olmedo is allowing, the prosecution asked for 3 new people. Judge Olmedo is allowing 2 and did not allow the 3rd.
Okay.
The 2 that she is allowing, otherwise most of the witnesses are the same as before. But she's allowing Claire Headley to be a Scientology expert this time. And you remember the prosecution wanted her to be an expert last time, and the judge said no.
Right.
And her reasoning then was that she had seen the Jane Does in the preliminary hearing and that they had done fine explaining Scientology. That was her reason why she did not allow Claire last time.
Okay.
So what's different this time, Chris? Because she didn't really explain it. I would just say that in general, she seems to, now that she's seen how things go, I think she realized that the Jane Does maybe don't explain the policies as well as these jurors should know. Mm-hmm. And so she's given the prosecution the ability to bring in Claire so Claire can explain the importance of these things and to make sure the jury understands. Because you remember what Mueller was saying was when he talked to the jurors, they just all ignored the Scientology.
Well, so, yeah, exactly.
And so I think the Judge Olmedo is giving them that opportunity to have her there. So I'm excited that Claire's gonna be part of it. The other 2, there's a 5th accuser now, Chris. This is Kathleen Jenkins from Toronto. I first wrote about her a couple of years ago. She had said something publicly on Twitter, and so I reached out to her, and she gave me an on-the-record interview. She works in the film industry, and her allegation is in the year 2000, she was raped by Danny Masterson at a cast party in Toronto. Mm-hmm. And she is now going to be able to come in and testify as an accuser. Now, the charges Danny faces are still only based on Jane Doe 1, Jane Doe 2, and Jane Doe 3. But they also allowed Jane Doe 4, Trisha Vesey, the actress Trisha Vesey, to testify last time as what's called a bad acts witness. In other words, somebody who has a similar allegation, but they're not being charged on it. Mm. And she alleges that Danny raped her twice in 1996, and she gave some really compelling testimony. Mm-hmm. Judge Olmedo is allowing her back again, and now they're adding a 5th accuser, this Kathleen Jenkins from Toronto. So that's interesting. And then the 3rd person they wanted was another person that you read about first on my website. His name's Nick Olszewski. He worked on the ranch with Danny and reached out to me and said that he had seen Danny do a couple things that he thought was interesting in light of the charges. And in particular, he said that at one point, one of the young women on the cast was going to have a birthday party or something in Las Vegas with her girlfriends. And Nick oversaw saw Danny Masterson giving them advice about how to avoid being roofied. And Nick remembers thinking, he sure knows a lot about that.
Right. It was very detailed advice. Yeah.
And so the prosecution wanted to bring him in, but Judge Olmedo ruled that this would have been 2015 or 2016 when he made this remark. And she said that's just not relevant to what might have taken place in the years 2001 to 2003.
Right.
So she's not allowing him to testify, but she is allowing Kathleen Jenkins as an accuser and Claire Headley as an expert.
Excellent. And I am of course pleased as punch that Claire is getting on the stand this time because of course she comes from a background of having worked directly under David Miscavige. I mean,
Right.
right in there in the same room for years. So she knows the inner workings of what's going on up there at that level, like very few others. And so, so bringing that expertise to the stand, and for me, the exciting part about that, or the most compelling part, I think, for the case, as far as I can tell, for that, is going to be that she is going to be talking about nothing but that. She's not a victim who has a story to tell, and let me tell you about some of my run-ins with Scientology. No, this is, let me tell you about Scientology and what goes on in that group from the highest to the lowest. And perhaps they could ask her sharp and pointed questions about the justice system, the KRs, the report system, the culture, how it kind of works and is all developed around this snitch culture and this culture of not only reporting, but of keeping everything inside the bubble world. You do not trust outside sources. You don't go to the law, period. They're actually made out within the world of Scientology that the cops and the judges and the entire judicial system is corrupt from bottom to top, and you would not want to go anywhere near any of that. Scientology has its own justice system, and we take care of our own. And when you see, of course, how these victims were taken care of by the church, you realize all of that is complete horseshit. But that's what Claire can actually speak intelligently and directly to, where the victims, I think, kind of alluded or talked or said their experiences a little bit about it, but really even that was just piecemeal here and there, and it never really formed a clear picture for the court as to what was really going on.
We got some idea last time of how Cohen might try to undermine her a little bit. And of course, as an expert witness, she's not only going to give testimony about Scientology, she's going to have to go through cross-examination by Cohen.
Yep.
And the last time I remember, it was actually Karen Goldstein who was presenting the reason why they didn't want her in the trial. And what they focused on was that she and her husband helped people get out of Scientology.
Yes.
So they were trying to portray her as an activist, as an advocate, and not as an expert. So I assume she's going to have to go through something like that on the stand. But Claire's tough. She can handle Cohen, I think.
Yeah, no, and they'll probably, I mean, she's somebody who did security checking for David Miscavige. She's somebody who understands questioning and pressure. I mean, very good. You know what I'm saying? Like that's, yeah, she's used to being on the hot seat. The other thing that's really great, and this is actually a really important point again for me on this, and I think for the case, is as an expert witness, that means her opinion. She can say her opinion. That's she doesn't have to just go fact, fact, fact. That's the whole point of an expert witness. And so with that status comes a whole ton of information she can give and ideas she can give from her experience and her expertise. So I don't know that they could have necessarily picked a better person, and so anyway, I'm really happy to see this happening.
Another change the prosecution is going to make is they're going to swap out their other expert, the Mindy Mechanic, who was the expert in the first trial, who I thought did a very good job explaining the difference between someone who was raped by an acquaintance versus somebody who's raped by a stranger.
Yeah.
That apparently just didn't stick with the jury. So they're going to bring in another expert who I think is going to testify a little bit more about the drugging angle. And that was another thing that came up in the arguments in the hearing this week, was that it looks like, I mean, the women can't really change their testimony. They're going to say the same thing. But if you remember last time, they were allowed to say something like, okay, Jane Doe 1 went to Danny's house that night. She had not had anything to drink up to that point. He gave her a drink, a red fruity drink. Yeah. And then in 15 or 20 minutes, she felt mysteriously intoxicated.
Right.
Now, she can't testify to what was in that cup. She can't speculate. All she can do is say, I had one drink and then was really out of it. Yeah. And then, of course, the inference is there may have been something in that drink. Well, I think now they're bringing in an expert who's going to look at that and suggest why that fits the pattern of somebody who's been drugged. So they're going to try to put more emphasis, because all 5 women have testimony along those lines. And if I had a criticism on that first trial, I think we talked about this, Chris, was it felt like there wasn't much of a narrative being spun. There wasn't a story for the jury.
Yeah.
And it feels like this time they're going to pay a little more attention to that with the Scientology with Claire, with the drugging with the expert, and try to build up more of a picture in the jury's minds about how this all went down. So those to me seem like things that are very favorable for the prosecution. And I mean, the defense wanted a delay. They didn't really get it. They only got 6 days. And also the defense wanted Detective Reyes testify about inconsistencies. That Detective Reyes is saying that they said things in 2017 that they aren't saying today. And the judge is allowing that. So that the defense got that. But, I don't know. It just seems to me like the prosecution is definitely addressing some of the issues that led to a hung jury in the first trial.
I agree. I'm hoping that that's exactly what they're doing with this, because it was very clear that there was that Ms. Mechanic's testimony was falling on deaf ears in some ways. And they were seeming to focus, I think the strategy there was to focus on explaining psychologically why people would wait so long, why there would be delays, why there would be problems in having the event occur, and then, all this time pass, and well, what's up with that? And how the trauma works and all that. And I thought she did amazing, but it just didn't fly. But here, I think if they're using this approach the way you're talking about, then it will form a more coherent kind of, it was so here and there and here and there. It was hard to keep track of the timeline and how things were progressing. And okay, there was this, and then there was this, and then because it was all over the place, in terms of how the testimony was being given. So I really hope there's a more linear approach to this time, or at least, and that's not even a hit on the prosecution. It's just how things played out.
It's the way court is in a lot of ways. It's not it's not like it is in the movies at all. And,
no, no. It's
well, I guess for some reason I thought, also a criticism I would hear from readers was they felt that the judge was trying to hurry things along too much in the first trial.
Yeah,
and that the prosecution sort of felt pressured to not call more people.
Yeah.
So I had wondered if maybe the prosecution list would be longer this time, and it's actually shorter. So I'm that's interesting to me that I think they're focusing on people they really feel are the strongest, and maybe fewer people is a stronger overall story. I don't know, but really interesting. And jury selection starts on Monday, April 17th, so just 2 weeks from today. Chris.
Damn. This thing's coming up fast. Well, this is going to be wild. I guess we'll see what else occurs, in the next couple of weeks, but it looks like we're just speeding toward this thing. The other thing, moving right along, is I was more than a little impressed by another story that you posted this week, which was a write-up from Bruce Hines. And Bruce is somebody who actually lives here in Denver. I know him, and he's a wonderful man, and he has an incredible memory. And he did a detailed breakdown. You had a picture of him and an old photo of a young Neil Gaiman, who a lot of people don't know has a Scientology history. He's second gen. He grew up in a Scientology household, and he was a highly trained auditor and case supervisor. He wasn't just having a passing, reference to Scientology. He was in it.
And what was really fun about Bruce's account was he pointed out that Neil was OT3.
Yeah.
And that's really interesting to me.
Yep. Yeah, there's stuff in his early writing. I went back to the Sandman stuff, which he produced in the 80s. And there's little things you can kind of see if you're looking for him that kind of come out of the Scientology mind space. He has since shed all of that. He's no longer a Scientologist. He's absolutely out.
He's not a Scientologist, but he's very careful about what he says because although his father's passed away, his father was maybe the most prominent Scientologist in all of England. But his mother is still a very involved, wealthy donor. His sister is in the Sea Org in Los Angeles. His other sister is very involved in England. So he just doesn't say much. And then that's why it was interesting that he came out with that book about 8 years ago now, maybe 10, the ocean at the end of the lane,
Yeah.
in which he kind of dug into his St. Hill upbringing. He grew up at St. Hill, Chris,
Yeah.
and then he went to Flag and was getting some auditing from Bruce Hines. So thank you, Bruce, for giving us that glimpse. And the other thing I wanted to ask you about, Bruce did such a good job in that piece talking about the sort of everyday life of a Flag auditor and the quotas and the hours and the logistics in a way it really helped me understand how that place operates.
Yeah.
Was that familiar with what kind of places where you were working, Chris?
Well, absolutely. In fact, my job was overseeing everything he was talking about, but not at Flag, over in Los Angeles. All the back lines, here's how we deliver the auditing, here's how the folders work, here's how the sessions work, here's how the scheduling works. That was my daily bread and butter. I ran it both as a manager and on the ground as an executive running a Hubbard Guidance Center, which is what they call the places you go in Scientology to get auditing. So I loved that article because it was one of the few places outside of my channel where I have seen somebody break down in that level of detail all the details about how Scientology actually does what it does when it comes to getting auditing to people. And I thought it was a brilliant window into, oh, this is what it's like for somebody who pays for their auditing and goes up the bridge. This is what it looks like. This is what it feels like. And Bruce did such a great job breaking all that down. It's rare to see that kind of detailed look at the world of Scientology from outside.
And he made a really interesting observation. He was emphasizing the rote nature of it.
Mm-hmm.
And, he said, I think he was, the people sometimes, when you want to explain what auditing is, you'll just sort of say, well, it's sort of Scientology's version of counseling. But he wanted people to understand it's not counseling. Exactly. It's got nothing to do with you. It's this rote memorization garbage. How did you feel about that?
No, absolutely. He nailed it there. Nailed it. I have talked about how Hubbard created a kind of factory line, assembly line therapy, and I really use that word loosely, in describing auditing. It's a production line. And they actually we used to talk about it that way as executives and people overseeing it. We would get briefings from RTC about production lines, and here's how you just run people through this mill. And that's how it was kind of described and run. And that's not, I mean, now that I know everything I know about psychology and therapy, it's like, wow, did it put a lot of distance between what Scientology is doing. And that's why I don't even want to use those words anymore in talking about counseling therapy. It's not that at all. And also the point of he kind of put it in there that it was all about the hours, the statistics, the number of times you could get people in session in a day and just get them through their hours, because that's what it was all about. Because when they run out of their hours, you send them down to the salespeople and you sell them some more. And it's this whole little line. And that is, like I said, outside of my channel, and I have broken all of this down. And in fact, Sonny Pereira and I did a whole breakdown on this, on how this stuff works a couple of years ago. You just don't see that level of detail in this. And so I really hope people got a chance to read that write-up from him, because it was quite good. Okay, so then we had that decision on arbitration with the Baxter case. What happened there?
Friday, late Friday, is when government offices like to dump information they don't want a lot of press on.
Yeah.
And I can understand why Judge Thomas Barber does not want a whole lot of attention put on the decisions he released Friday night. He sounded reluctant. He made it sound like his hands were tied. There's nothing he can do about it. He acknowledged how awful it sounds. And what we're talking about, Chris, is just earlier, you and I had been trying to handicap this case. We're talking about the labor trafficking case filed in Tampa by Valeska Paris and the Baxters.
Yeah.
And I think we had talked about that. We kind of had a feeling Judge Barber would deny David Miscavige's objections to being served.
Yeah.
But it seemed like there was a chance that he would grant Scientology's motion to force this into arbitration. Well, that's exactly what he did. He put both of those rulings out at the same time, late on Friday. And so I just jumped on him as fast as I could just to report the news, let people know. He did deny David Miscavige's objection. David Miscavige is an official defendant in the case, but then he completely derailed the lawsuit, saying that Scientology's motions to force this into internal religious arbitration are valid and they can do that. So, just amazing. Just like the Garcias and Valerie Haney's case, another lawsuit brought by former Scientologists has basically been ended, and they've been told they cannot sue in court. It's just, it's amazing. And I if you go through the ruling, he just knocks down every one of their arguments, and he ends up saying, look, I know this just looks bad that these former Scientologists have to go crawling back to Scientology with their grievances, but that's the way the law stands. I mean, he's basically blaming Congress and says he has no other option.
Yeah.
Stunning, isn't it, Chris?
So disappointing, so incredible. I mean, that word doesn't even begin to describe, kind of some of the anger that I think a lot of us are experiencing over this. It's 3-1, if my count's right, on cases being sent over to arbitration versus the Masterson victims having overcome that in California court. And all I can, my lawyer friends tell me that it is a case of they're not making a good enough case to the judge at the beginning of this stuff, that these contracts were signed under duress and therefore should be considered invalid. And that's the attack that you should be making on this. And somehow that attack is not being made well enough. I don't know. I'm not the legal guy. I've reached out to legal people.
Right.
I haven't heard back yet on this, but the lawyers I do know, they've looked over the pleadings and the documents, and they go, they really could have made a stronger case on this, that they were signed under duress. That's all I've got, because
no, not in this case. In this case, I mean, you could definitely criticize the way both the Valerie Haney and the Masterson case was handled at the beginning.
Yeah.
But this crew knew what they were getting into. This is Neil Glazer. He had taken on Nexium. This guy did not take this case on lightly. He brought on a huge number of people with him.
Yeah.
Their filings were absolutely top notch. They bore into the duress issue hard. They went after all kinds of things on this to say that these contracts were invalid and they shouldn't be forced. Every single argument that we've talked about in the past, First Amendment, that you can't force ex-Scientologists into a Scientology proceeding, duress, that they signed these contracts under pressure. I mean, every single one of these arguments were made. Now, one of the, of course, and we said this from the very beginning with this case, one of the very tough things is this is the not just the courthouse, but the very courtroom where the Garcias were in.
That's right.
And they had that judge also force them into arbitration, and then it was upheld by the 11th Circuit.
Yeah.
So that's a very heavy precedent, and Judge Barber repeatedly cited the 11th Circuit opinion when he made this ruling. So I don't see how you sue in this court. Now, let's talk about the Masterson just for a second, because you're right. That's the exception. Yeah. That the Masterson accusers are suing Scientology for harassment. They're not suing over the rapes. They're suing over harassment. Scientology did also get that one derailed into arbitration initially, but an appeals court overturned that because the ruling by the appeals court was the harm that Scientology is alleged to have done here, harassing these women, occurred after they had left the church. So the appeals court said those contracts just don't apply anymore because they just don't apply to after you've left. Now it's on hold, while the criminal case is going on. But that's the one exception, has been to show that the allegations occurred after the people left. Now that's not the case here with the Baxters. Yeah. So I assume they're going to put up a fight and try to do what Valerie has done, ask for reconsideration, that kind of thing. But you can see with Valerie, she just tried and tried for a couple of years, and it just never went anywhere. Now she's facing the prospect of actually doing the arbitration. So
yeah,
I don't know. It's just Scientology has made it very difficult for former church members to sue. That's just the reality now.
That's right. That's exactly right. It's maybe some legal eagles got some other ideas on how to take this apart, or maybe the arbitration process itself is something that could be, looked into. I don't know. I'm told, no, it's kind of over to them, and they agreed to it, and therefore it's whatever Scientology wants to do, however much of a kangaroo court they want to set up. I guess we'll see how this, what they choose to do. They always obviously knew this could be a possibility, a possible outcome of their pleadings. So we'll have to see how this goes. Personally, from my end, I'm most upset about the fact that there is absolutely no way you can look at this as anything other than re-traumatizing these victims. There just isn't any other way to look at it. And at the human level, it's so wrong. And I can see why the judge is like, my hands are tied. And maybe they are. It's still not right.
And I'll tell you one thing that was amazing in his opinion, Chris, that you should take a look at is he at one point said he has seen no evidence that these ex-Scientologists going to a panel of Scientologists in good standing would be unfair. And I was just stunned. Like, they haven't seen enough evidence of that. So I don't know. We'll see how they respond. I don't know.
Yeah, it's very frustrating.
Really disappointing.
Yeah, we're somehow, some way, this has got to be able to be overcome, and we need some, we need some more, we need some really smart people to tackle this problem and take it apart, because this is not going to stop with Scientology. I guarantee you there are going to be other groups who are going to use this, who are going to utilize this to, to take advantage of their people. And that's what concerns me a lot about this and moving forward, is how precedent setting this can be, because other people, other groups, other destructive cults, obviously I'm talking about here, look at this and go, and it's just,
but then the question is like, okay, so another group, the question then becomes, when do you get people to sign a contract over what? I mean, that's what's so interesting about Scientology, is that you're not going into a church to pray with a bunch of people. You're going in to sit down with an auditor to go through auditing. So that's something that, okay, I'll sign a waiver. They don't even think of it. They have no idea they're signing an arbitration clause.
That's right. And and obviously the con here, or the trick is, get them when they're in a euphoric state. Get them when they're, this is amazing, right after their first go around. So you give them a free intro, and Scientology does this. Do a free introductory service, free introductory session. Oh my God, I feel amazing. Great, sign on the dotted line and we will get you more of this. And there are so many pseudotherapeutic cults, pseudoscientific kind of science adjacent groups that offer services, offer products, and just all you got to do is sign on the dotted line, and there's your arbitration clause, and they're locked in, So it's so it's a grift that I think is going to. I don't know that this is the only place or time we're going to see this, see this going, if we can't figure out some way to put the kibosh on it. And we'll see how this plays out. Now, okay, that all being said, and clearly we're frustrated.
Well, that was Friday night.
Yeah, and then we have
Sunday morning, we got the big blockbuster from Tracy McManus at the Tampa Bay Times that we had been waiting for. We had heard a little something about that something was coming. I had no idea what it was. I was just really looking forward to it. And so it popped up Sunday morning, and I quickly read it and wrote kind of a description of it for my Substack. And what Tracy had done, if you go back a little bit, and David Miscavige really, really wanted this little tiny piece of land in the middle of downtown Clearwater that he covets, and the city won't give it to him. And they first let him know in 2017 he wasn't going to get it, and so suddenly then a bunch of wealthy Scientologists bought up a bunch of more of Clearwater downtown and the North Marina area. This was revealed by Tracy in just an amazing investigation she came out with in 2019, I think, where she revealed that Scientology had more than doubled its ownership of Clearwater. Well, Scientology and Scientologists. And see, that was kind of the missing piece, was that she could map out how much these wealthy Scientologists bought up the town, but the Church of Scientology denied it had anything to do with it. Now, you and I and everybody else could see what was really going on was that Miscavige was upset, and he asked these wealthy Scientologists like Trish Duggan to buy up a bunch more land. They denied that they had anything to do with each other about it, but we all assumed that there was some church oversight of that.
That's right.
Well, now the new story is she got a hold of an email from an OT8 Scientologist investor in Nashville by the name of Stephen Epstein, who had bought some of these properties in the North Marina area. And Trish Duggan had as well. And the email was from Epstein to a developer. He's lived in a lot of places, but most recently he was in Arizona. His name is Rodney Riley. And this guy in Arizona, I don't know if you know this, I lived in Arizona, but when you think of Mormons, you think of Utah, but actually there's a big Mormon population in Arizona too. And he had done some development with Mormon property owners.
Yeah.
Kind of sort of, I don't know if you want to say fronting for the church there or not, but basically taking land that Mormons owned and creating something. So Scientology had reached out to him, and in this email, they were basically telling him, we want you to come to Clearwater. You're going to be the white knight and make this legit. Yeah. Epstein actually used the word legit. And sure enough, last year, this Riley came to Clearwater and then announced that he was putting together a $350 million development of the North Marina area. Now, I want to make it real clear, Chris, nobody is saying that this is a bad project. This could be a very good project for the north side of Clearwater's downtown in the North Marina area. But it's just, now we finally have that missing piece from what Tracy has done before. Here now is the email, because not only was it clear that this Riley was being brought in to be a front for these Scientologist landowners, but it also talked about how you're going to coordinate with Ben Shaw of the church itself in getting even more property for a museum. And we know what that means. They want to put in a museum to L. Ron Hubbard in Clearwater. So the email makes it clear that, yes, there is a coordinated effort between the Church of Scientology, these wealthy Scientologist owners, and this out-of-town front shill named Rodney Riley. He denied it. Epstein denied it. The church denied it. But that's what they always do, Chris. They always deny everything. But it's right there in the email showing that, yes, there is this coordinated effort with the church to, own Clearwater outright. And again, I want to point out, this use of properties in the North Marina area could end up being a really nice thing. But what she quoted a city manager saying, yeah, but it's the deception that's kind of off here, because if you're going to do this, why don't you just say who you're doing it for? So just a really fun new development showing that what the Church of Scientology is really doing in Clearwater.
Yeah, exactly. I've sort of dubbed this in my mind as Operation Normandy, the sequel, because it's kind of like, and that's a reference to the 1970s L. Ron Hubbard written program to literally take over Clearwater as a town and use it for Scientology's ends. That is, there's no quibbling about that. There's no question about that. That is what Scientology intended. And I need to say, as a former, seer member and Scientologist, they don't just let that kind of thing go. That's that is L. Ron Hubbard's intention, and that has very much been the expressed intention of David Miscavige through his actions, not necessarily through his words, but you see what they do rather than what they say. And if they don't get their way, they pick up all their toys and go home and oh, we're going to get you guys. And now that's clearly, these guys think, another thing is Miscavige can think in the long term. It's like, okay, we're going to take this thing down now, and we're going to erode the city council and the city's power over itself by taking over the city through all this moneyed, wealthy Scientologists we have, and take a page from the Mormons, who had gotten in an awful lot of trouble a few years ago through a lot of exposure of massive property acquisition, and now they use front people. Just introduce layers of deception, layers of, plausible deniability, whatever. Let's do that. And here, again, these cults learn from each other. They watch each other. And here we have a perfect example of that with this guy coming in, this out-of-town, shooter, whatever, and he's going to come in and help them facilitate their plans to completely undermine Clearwater as a town and realize Scientology's ends. Who even knows? David Miscavige is treating this little plot of land like it's got leprechaun gold buried in it or something. I have no idea why these things are so important, except for the fact that they're standing in their way. They're standing in our way.
Well, let me hazard a theory.
Yeah,
I'm going to be. I'm interviewing Mark Bunker later today. We're going to go over all this together, and so tomorrow with the Substack, I hope people will see what he thinks. But I'm gonna pose a theory for you, Chris, and that is what I try to keep in mind with the Flag Land Base, Scientology's campus in Clearwater, downtown Clearwater. This is the financial engine of the entire Scientology enterprise.
Yes, it is.
And the reason is because wealthy Scientologists from around the world have to come to Flag to get certain upper level processes.
That's right.
There's nowhere else they can get them. So every wealthy Scientologist knows at some point they're going to have to put their businesses on hold, fly to Florida, spend weeks and weeks there, spend incredible amounts of money, hundreds of thousands of dollars, and then fly home with their certificates or whatever. And while they're there, they're walking from one building to another. They might be staying at the Oak Cove. They might be getting some auditing at the Sandcastle. They might be going to dinner at the Fort Harrison. Miscavige does not want outsiders observing this going on. But he can't literally shut down downtown Clearwater. He can't close the streets. He can't put up a wall. So all this is going on with these Scientologists, the Sea Org members, and the customers shuttling back and forth. The fewer tourists, the fewer outsiders, the more Miscavige is happy. So it bothers him that the city council is trying to create this revived Imagine Clearwater, they call it, down at the waterfront at the bluff, and it bugs him. And so what has he done? He's bought a bunch more property, so he just controls the place even more. But particularly around the North Marina, which is a little farther north than the area we're talking about. And up there, he's got Trish Duggan and Stephen Epstein, and now their front, Rodney Riley, trying to put together an attractive marina waterfront, attraction. And it just feels to me, Chris, like he's realizing he's not going to be able to stop the city from putting together their things in the downtown. What if they try to put together a more attractive village a little farther north to compete with that and draw business away? Is that a way to keep the downtown dead and defeat what the city's doing? That's just something I'm going to ask Bunker what he may think I'm crazy, but that's something I'm going to ask Mark Bunker, because that to me feels like, because again, I'll say it again, this $350 million development that Riley's trying to do in the North Marina could be a very nice thing for the people that live there. But you always have to wonder, why would Miscavige be helping him out with that? What does the church get out of it?
Yeah, exactly.
And I think it might just be to draw people away from what Mark Bunker and the rest of the city council is trying to do, just a mile south or however. I'm not exactly sure the distance, but So that's something to I'll be asking him about. We'll see what he has to say about that.
Yeah, I will say this, and I know this is this generalized kind of thing, and yet isn't it interesting in all the years you've been reporting on Scientology, and certainly all the years I've been in and out of it, there's this little mantra, this little saying that we have that always turns out to be true. Scientology is always worse than you think. No matter what you think they're up to or doing or how kind of curvy they can get, it's always pans out to be worse than you think. And I'll tell you something that really tells me how important this is to them and how exposure of this bothers them so much are the completely unhinged responses from Ben Shaw to this, to the exposure of this. I mean, he went on a roll, and we're talking about Tracy McManus, a reporter in a, you know, not a big town, not a big, you know, thing. And she's, well, I mean, I'm not trying to put her down in any way. That's not my point. It's that here's a story of real estate development and a church and bringing in some out-of-town guy and some conflict with the city council. Yeah. And what's the response from Ben Shaw? Propagandist! Oh my God, you crazy, you know, you anti-big religious bigot, scumbag, horrible people. How could you? It's like, holy cow, man. Yeah. Level 20 reaction to a level 5 story, let's say. You know, it's just, it's so over the top that it tells you this is very important to them.
Yeah, good point.
You know, so.
And I also just want to point out, I know, look, there's no question Scientology had a rough time in the pandemic. And I think they're struggling. They're struggling with staffing. They're struggling with their Ideal Org program. But let's calm down with the Scientology last days stuff, because, which I'm seeing in some quarters, like, you know, Scientology in its last leg. Let's look at just this weekend. They have confirmed that they've made themselves largely lawsuit proof with the help of the U.S. court system.
Yeah.
And that they are, you know, working a $350 million operation to, you know, in their spiritual city of Clearwater. I mean, yes, in certain ways, I think Scientology is hurting, but they still have some power and they're going to be around. So we just got to keep an eye on them, Chris. We just got to,
that's right.
You know, and again, that's the best thing this weekend was Tracy McManus caught them red-handed and Ben Shaw lost his mind.
Oh, absolutely. And more of that we can absolutely predict. Absolutely, we are going to see more of that. Because let's be real, they are a destructive cult and they do bad things. They rile people up to, as you see with Ben Shaw, he's the poster child for extremism right now. I mean, you can't look at what he's doing and go, oh, this looks like a normal group of people, right? So, yes, so absolutely, I will definitely contribute to that thought. They're not on their last leg, so to speak. There's still a lot of initiative and inertia and money there to be utilized to push this thing forward. So let's remember, it's always worse than you think.
That's all.
You know?
And if you want to see what we're talking about, come on over to TonyOrtega.substack.com.
That's right. There it is on the screen right next to Tony's name there. Tony, thanks very much for coming around and doing this with me each week.
Thank you, Chris.
All right, guys, out there, of course, do subscribe to Tony. Do subscribe to my channel if you are not already. And I will see you guys next week. Bye-bye.